So we are going to discuss the concept of matzah, which does appear in our Torah portion, because it says in Leviticus chapter 2, which in a discussion of the mincha offering, the grain offering, which we know was brought on the Mizbeach as a voluntary offering, we're told that it is supposed to be matzot. It says in chapter 2 that it is karban mincha ma'afei tanur. If you're going to bring the mincha offering as a baked in the oven, then soas chalos matzos bulos bashem. It needs to be like chalos, like thicker loaves that are mixed with oil, and they are called matzot. They're called matzot. Also, we're told that rikikei matzos mishuchim bashamin. Also, if they're thin wafers, they're also matzos mixed with oil. So the sacred offering is called the matzos or matzot, and this is an important idea, because why is the korban associated with matzah? Why is the korban mincha associated with this concept of matzah? So we saw it's obviously, we know that the verse says that not only is the bread have to be matzah, it also emphasizes that the grain offering in the Beis Hamikdash is not allowed to be leaven. It's not allowed to be chametz, with the exception of the shtei alachim, the 2 loaves of bread on Shavuot, and also the Thanksgiving offering, which 10 of the 40 loaves are supposed to be chametz. But the whole concept of matzah is obviously something that we as Jews should be thinking about before Pesach, and thinking about why is this isn't just eaten on Passover night, on Seder night. It's also something which was the bread or the food of the Beit HaMikdash. So in that context, I wanted to have like a little discussion of matzah this year, because we could gain insight into the nature of matzah by looking at the calendar quirk which we have this year. It appears every few years or so. The last time was 2008. That the Eve of Pesach comes on, the Eve of Pesach coincides with Shabbat. That's what happens this year, and so therefore the first Seder night is Saturday night. So now we have a problem. Hold on 1 second. Somebody's sending me a message. So is there a relationship? Somebody is asking, is there a relationship between the word matzot and the word mitzvot? It's an excellent question. Matzot, it refers to the bread, and mitzvot refers to the commandments from Hashem. It is an excellent question, because the rabbis do say, where it says ushmartem et matzot, that you must guard the matzot. The rabbis say, read it as mitzvot. Read it as we have to guard all the mitzvot and do them in a zealous fashion. So the rabbis do draw that relationship between the two. So but again, let me go back to this idea of how are we going to observe the mitzvah of eating matzah on Saturday night this year with all of its laws, because there's a problem. When Shabbat coincides with the Eve of Pesach, but on Shabbat, we also have the practice that we're supposed to eat lechem mishnah. We're supposed to eat 2 loaves of bread. So how are we supposed to eat 2 loaves of bread? Okay, fine. So you could say just have challah and maybe eat the challah outside on your porch, or eat it over a napkin, so you don't get any of the breadcrumbs on your Pesach dishes and stuff, because you don't want to put away your Pesach, your regular utensils, put them away, and then take out the Pesach stuff on Shabbos. So what do you do? So what we do is either you eat 2 loaves of bread, maybe you eat it over a napkin, or you eat it outside. But then there's another issue. Well, why can't you just eat matzah? Why can't you just eat on Pesach morning? Why can't you just fulfill the mitzvah of eating 2 loaves of bread by eating matzah? We know that matzah is also going to be considered bread, and during the year you can use matzah as your 2 loaves of bread that you eat on Shabbat. And why don't we just use the matzah? And there's a second problem, that there is a concern, even though on a regular Shabbat one is permitted to eat on an Erev Shabbat. On Pesach, the Mishnah says specifically about the Eve of Pesach, it says Erev Pesachim the Gemara Pesachim 99b, the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, Erev Pesachim Samuch Mincha will yochel adam ad shetachshach. On the eve of Pesach, close to Mincha, a person should not eat until it gets dark. Meaning to say that there's a separate concern about eating on the eve of Pesach. So, or at least on the afternoon of the eve of Pesach. So, if that's the case, what should a person use as their lechem mishnah? So the practice has become to eat the meal, the second meal, and usually the third meal, also in the morning of Pesach, the 3 meals that we have on Shabbos, to eat second and third meal before the time, if you're going to eat bread, to eat it before the time where chametz becomes prohibited to eat, which is the 4th hour of the day on the eve of Pesach. I think this year it's around 11 something or other. I don't know the times by heart. So that's become the practice if you're going to eat bread, and that way you pray really early, and then you come home, you eat the meal, then you go outside and you make like a break, and then you eat a third meal all before, let's say 11 a.m., whatever the time is, and that way you could eat bread. But what about if you're concerned that even eating this bread, it's going to get over your chametz? So can you just eat matzah? It's the Eve of Pesach. Why can't you eat the matzah on the Eve of Pesach? So there we get into a larger discussion, which actually has some beautiful ideas in it, which we could spend some time discussing. The larger discussion is, why don't we eat the matzah on the Eve of Pesach? What's the source of this idea of not eating the matzah on the Eve of Pesach? So this is based upon a statement from the Jerusalem Talmud. In addition to the Bavli Talmud does not mention this prohibition at all, although one of the great commentaries on the Bavli Talmud does mention it. But the Yerushalmi Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, mentions that one who eats the matzah on the eve of Pesach is, I'll read their language. It's as though, and it compares it to somebody who is with let me take a step back. By Jewish law, there's 2 stages of marriage. There's the first stage where you're betrothed, but that's a formal betrothment. That's a formal engagement, which will require a divorce to separate. And then there's the fully married, nisuin, where they go and they live together. So during the betrothal part, they are not allowed to be together physically. It's only during the fully married part that they're allowed to be together, even though they're betrothed and they're legally bound. Not like today where an engagement is not legally bound. They are legally bound. They're just not yet allowed to be intimate with each other. So the Yerushalmi Talmud says that one who eats the matzah on the eve of Pesach, somebody who eats matzah on the eve of Pesach, it's as though they are with their betrothed spouse in her father's home. Meaning to say they jumped the boat. They should have waited until they're fully married. So to the matzah, you have to wait till the night of matzah. So we can spend a moment and thinking about this. Like, what's the relationship between being with one's fiance or betrothed wife in her father's home and eating matzah? It seems a little bit of a stretch to say that the two are comparable, to eating matzah prior to the night of Pesach and to being with one's betrothed wife. So there's a couple of explanations of this. Just give me 1 minute and then I'll just take some questions about it. I just want to present this for just a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and I'll take some questions about this. So we'll see a couple of the explanations for the reasons in a moment, but the Rambam says, before we look at how they are, what's the comparison between a betrothed spouse and eating matzah, the Rambam in his laws of chametz matzah, laws of eating leaven and unleavened bread, chapter 6, law 12, explains that the reason for the prohibition of not eating matzah on the eve of Pesach is to make a heker, is to make a distinction to the eating of matzah. We want it to be special. If you always eat matzah every day for lunch, every day you take a matzah and cream cheese sandwich, and that's what you eat your lunch, then the matzah is not going to be special when it comes to the night of Pesach. We want it to be special, that we're eating it for the purpose of doing a mitzvah, of eating the sacred bread. It's a holy bread, the only holy food we have today in our tradition. Everybody should remember this on Saturday night. When you eat your matzah, the only holy food we have in our entire tradition today. In the time of the Torah, we had all the korbanot, we had the truma, we had the meiser, we had the kodshim, we had the sacred food. Today, there's only one thing that we can biblically fulfill a commandment to eat, and that is matzah. But if we're eating the matzah every day, then it doesn't feel special. So the only way to fulfill this commandment is to eat matzah bread. And that is such a powerful thing, that we're taking the holy food and eating it and consuming it and bringing it into our body. So Maimonides says that in order to draw a distinction between the regular matzah, the regular food we eat, and the holy matzah on the first night of Pesach, therefore, he writes, Asru Chachamim, the rabbis prohibited le'echol matzah be'erev Pesach, to eat the matzah on the eve of Pesach, in order to draw a distinction between the regular bread we eat and the bread we eat on the night of Pesach. And then he says very strong language, because this is clearly just a rabbinic prohibition to eat matzah on the eve of Pesach. But listen to his language. He says as follows. He says, somebody who eats mishachal matzah be'erev Pesach, somebody who eats the matzah on the eve of Pesach, makas mardus, we strike him. Obviously, we don't do that anymore, but in Maimonides' formulation, writing in the Middle Ages, that's what he wrote. He said, we strike him ad shetetze nafsho, until his soul departs. Very strong language. He's very upset about this. It's unusual. This is just, what is he doing? He's eating matzah. He's not eating pig. He's eating the holy bread. He's just eating it a few hours early. What's so bad about this? But that's what the Rambam writes. We'll talk about in a moment why he's so, what's the concept here. But there's another approach that's brought down, and this is brought down by the author of the Manhig, and he says that he derives its source from the fact that it says in the Torah that what's the real source of this idea. It's not just to draw a distinction between the matzah that we don't eat for a mitzvah and the thing we do for a mitzvah, which is all about intentionality, that when we're eating the matzah on Seder night, remind everybody, this is the mitzvah. And it's not just like, oh, I love matzah. You ever have a friend who says, oh, I love matzah? Yeah, you eat something once, you love it. But if you have to eat it and you can only eat it for 8 days, maybe you don't love it as much. So there's intentionality into the thinking about the food, that it's not just lunch. It's a powerful idea. So the other idea is brought down that the author of the Manhig says, because it says in the Torah, ba'erev tochlu ma'atzos, that you have to eat it in the evening, which implies that if you eat it in the evening, you're in violation. If you eat it during the day on the eve of Pesach, you're in violation of the positive commandment of eating it in the evening, meaning to say it's a prohibition that comes, even though it was not explicitly stated, it's a prohibition that's from the lack of doing the positive commandment of eating it in the evening. So therefore, that's 2 theories about what's the basis for this prohibition. And now we turn to what's the reason why it's compared in this interesting manner to a person who is with their betrothed fiance. So about this, I saw 5 explanations. So let me just share with you the 5 explanations and about this. So the first explanation is from the Ritva, the 14th century Spanish commentary, and he says that the matzah isn't his idea. He says the matzah is called the betrothed. Why is matzah referred to as our fiance? Right, because it's compared to our fiance. It's called a betrothed spouse, and the reason is because the matzah, he assumes, is the first mitzvah the Jewish people were commanded to do. So it's like the betrothed. It's really not exactly the first mitzvah. The first mitzvah we said is the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, but it's part of the first mitzvah, because in Exodus chapter 12, we were told by God about the mitzvah of making a new moon, and as part of that we have the Paschal Lamb, but we were also told at the very beginning to make matzah. So it's one of the first, and so therefore that's why it's compared to a fiance. And so that's what one explanation that he gives. A second explanation, by the way, this will cause a great discussion at your Seder and say, and if you tell them this, ask them, why is a matzah compared to a fiance? It could actually, if you have a engaged couple at the Seder, it could cause some inappropriate comments. So you have to be sensitive about how you put that phrase there. The a second explanation is that, and this is to me seems like the most obvious one, and that is somebody who is uh, um, somebody who can't wait. They are unable to control their appetites, so to speak, and can't wait till evening, like the person who just stuffs the matzah down their throat. They can't wait. They have no impulse control. That's like the person who can't wait for the proper time to be with their engaged spouse, and so they don't have the ability to wait properly. I So, okay, that was the second approach. We can expand on that in a moment. Let me just first share the Abu Draham, again, another Provençal scholar in the 14th century. The Abu Draham writes in his Haggadah on his commentary on Halach Ma'anya. This is the bread of our affliction. Halach Ma'anya. This is the bread of Anya. We discussed a little bit where is the source of the bread of affliction. It comes from the Sifrei, which Rashi cites, and it's also in the Haggadah. He says this is the bread of our affliction. He writes that the Yerushalmi is comparing, the Jerusalem Talmud is comparing to the punishment that you would get lashes if you eat matzah on the eve of Pesach, just like anybody who's with their fiance when they're not yet married is also going to get lashes. So that's a third approach. A fourth approach is from the Maharal, the Maharal of Prague writes in his Sefer Gvuros Hashem. He says as follows. He says something. He says since the matzah, he says since the chametz is already prohibited, because chametz becomes prohibited to eat rabbinically from the 4th hour of the day, already on the Eve of Pesach. So since chametz is rabbinically prohibited, and also the matzah is not yet permitted. Matzah only becomes permitted at nightfall on the night of Pesach. Therefore, it's like a betrothed woman because the fiance is prohibited to the rest of the world once she and her husband and her fiance are betrothed, but she's not yet permitted to her fiance. So therefore, it is like this comparison. Chametz is already prohibited, but we're in this in-between state. That's, I guess, why engagement is such a tense time for so many people, because on the one hand, you're off limits to everybody else, but you're not yet fully on limits to the person you're supposed to be with for the rest of your life. And that is like the fiance, and that is like matzah. Chametz, you can't eat any chametz, but you're not yet able to eat the matzah. And then the sixth explanation, which was brought down by the Or Zarua, the 13th century Viennese who lived in Vienna. And he writes, and this is a powerful idea, he said, this is brought down in several sources, and they discuss it to see how we get there, but that just like at when a person gets married, under the chuppah, we recite Sheva Brachot. There are 7 blessings that are recited under the chuppah before you're able to before the husband and wife are fully married. And the scholars point out that there are 7 brachot that are recited at the Seder before you're able to eat the matzah. So it's the whole idea of reciting these 7 brachot, and that's why we compare it to the fiance. This idea of what exactly the 7 brachot are, that's also a complicated question, which everybody argues about. But the most common approach is to say that there are 3 blessings in the Kiddush, one on the wine, one on the sanctification of the day, and the third one on the blessing of Shehechiyanu. Then in addition to that, we have the second cup of wine, which we drink at the Seder. And we also make a blessing there on the conclusion of the Magid. And then we say the blessing of matzah and the blessing of hamotzi. And that's how we have the 7 blessing. Then there's another discussion. So okay, we still haven't got back to what should we do in our lives on the Eve of Pesach this year. We've discussed why it's prohibited, but we haven't discussed our solution. So one solution is to do the bread over a napkin. but that's really unpleasant. And also anybody who has anxiety is going to be concerned that maybe one crumb could get into your plates, and then all your plates are going to be chametz. There's a lot of anxiety there. So that's not what we're doing in my family. What we're doing in my family is doing something different. We are going to follow the approach or something that's hinted to from Tosfos. So what does Tosfos say? Because Tosfos says as follows. Tosfos, hold on, Tosfos says as follows. Tosfos says, hold on. Okay, so hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Let me just find the Tosfos. It's on 99b. The Tosfos points this out. Tosfos says, hold on. Let me just pull it up. Okay, here we go. The Tosfos points out that when the Yerushalmi says that you're not allowed to eat the matzah on the Eve of Pesach, what's he referring to? He's not referring to because it says in our Gemara that you're not allowed to eat near mincha. So what's it referring to that you can't eat near mincha? Because it can't be referring to chametz, because chametz is already prohibited from the 4th hour day. It can't be referring to the matzah, because matzah is prohibited the entire day. So therefore, what's it referring to? So Tosfos says it's referring to a different type of matzah called matzah ashira, or rich matzah. What's rich matzah? Generally speaking, when we make matzah, there's only 2 ingredients, flour and water. We have to be careful that the water, nowadays you just can't even take water from the sink and put it in, because that water has other stuff in it. You have to get pure spring water or well water. So that's all it is. But let's say you make the flour and you mix it with eggs. So then it's called what's called rich matzah. It's not flour and water, it's egg matzah. So Ashkenazim have the practice that matzah we can only be eaten, because we're not sure if it actually is chametz or not. So that matzah can only be eaten by people who are older, and in the time of the Talmud they had no teeth, they had nothing to chew, or very young people. They're the only ones who are allowed to eat the matzah on Pesach. Sephardic Jews are more lenient in this area, but Tosfos says that therefore when it says that you can't eat matzah on the Eve of Pesach, that's only according to the type of matzah that you can fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on the night of Pesach with. And that's not egg matzah. You can't fulfill the mitzvah of the commandment to eat the matzah by eating egg matzah. It's just not allowed. And so you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. And so therefore, for that reason, the matzah ashira, you could make hamotzi on the egg matzah as long as you're eating it over a meal. You can make hamotzi on it, and it's not chametz. You can't eat it on Pesach, but you can eat it on the Eve of Pesach, and you're not eating matzah. And so therefore, the preferred solution for many, including me, is that we eat egg matzah on the night before, on Friday night, and on the morning of Pesach, because that's not matzah and it's not chametz, and so therefore we can eat as much as the egg matzah as we want without worrying that it's going to become chametz. So that's the solution. And just before I stop and take questions on this topic, I want to point out that to me, the whole idea of not eating the matzah on the Eve of Pesach is not just about controlling our temptations. It's a very powerful idea. It's about the idea of redemption, of when does redemption come upon us? When are we feeling the redemption? The redemption is for sure with the matzah, as we said earlier. This is something that we have to be zealous about and rushing to do, but at the same time, we need to have patience. We need to have patience with respect to redemption. On the one hand, we know that redemption can come in an instant, but we also can't make one mistake which will mess up everything. And this will be like a fiance and with you've been working your whole life to have this relationship, to have an upcoming marriage, and the fiance is in her father's house. You can make one mistake which can set back everything and possibly endanger the entire relationship. So too, as it comes to a spiritual redemption, a lot of us are anxious. When are we going to have our redemption? But at the same time, we have to have perspective and patience with respect to the redemption, and therefore don't imagine that we can't do anything that will be, God forbid, endanger our relationship with God. That's the message there. So hold on 1 second.